thanks everybody for coming. It's really great to see so many Dell alums in the audience. It's really wonderful to see your faces, and it'll be great to hear your voices as well. So tonight we have a great panel. This is the, I think, second panel in the Leading the Change series, and we have a number of others coming up later this spring. This one is on managing your organizational footprint, and I feel really honored to have three incredible Duke Environmental Leadership alumni on this panel, and we also have two wonderful current first-year MEM, on-campus MEM students, Maggie Patchett and Cassidy White, who are going to be working with us to ask these panelists some really good questions. What we're going to do is Maggie and Cassie are going to ask questions for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. We have Laura Collins with us, who is also an MEM alum, and she is working in student services right now, and she has been working with us on leading the change behind the scenes. We have Ann Thurston from the Office of Development and Alumni Relations. She's doing a good job with managing all the details. She's an amazing project manager. And so Laura will be managing the questions after the 40-minute period in which Maggie and Cassidy will be interrogating the panel. So I would like to introduce our wonderful panel members. Tonight we have Cam Sholly, who is right now the superintendent of Yellowstone National Park. Just a small job he's doing right now. He's been in the National Park Service for a very long time and had a number of really important positions. He was the director of the Midwest region before this, which is a region of 61 national parks. Right after the Dell program, he was the superintendent of the Natchez River Parkway, which is a really cool park in Mississippi. But Yellowstone is the granddaddy of them all. And so it is a park which has 2.2 million acres and over 4 million visitors. It's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, national park in the world. So we're really pleased to have Cam talk about what it's like to manage your organizational footprint when you've got something like Yellowstone that you have to manage. We also have Dale Threatt-Taylor, who is the director of the Nature Conservancy of South Carolina. She's also a Dell MEM grad. Cam and Dale overlapped in that program. She has for a long time served as the director of the Wake County Soil and Water Conservation District. She retired from that position, but immediately stepped into the position of directing the state of South Carolina's Nature Conservancy region. And then last but not least, we have Katya Hantel, who's joining us from Chicago, where she is, I think that I'm trying to think of the exact title, Katya. She is a member of the research and development team at Conagra, but she leads the sustainable development efforts at Conagra, which is a very large company in the food and ag realm. So she works from the private sector. She has a team that she's working with to try to work and help Conagra become more sustainable, doing all kinds of really interesting and innovative things with Conagra. So we've got three really different perspectives, from the national park perspective, from the NGO perspective with Dale, and then the private sector with Katya. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cassidy and Maggie. They have really great questions for our panelists. And here we go. I'll turn off my mic.
All right, thank you so much, Deb. So just to reiterate again, if anybody has pressing questions that they want to be able to ask after Cassidy's and I's Q&A, you can either put them in the chat to everyone or directly to Laura. Please don't direct them at the panelists, because they're spending their time talking to you guys. They're not looking at their chat. But we want to start it off by if all of you would give us maybe about a 3-minute synopsis of kind of your career journey and how you got where you are today. And we'll go in the same order that Deb introduced you. So Cam, if you would start us off, that would be awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Maggie. It's good to see everybody. Just 3 minutes or less. I am a third-generation national park manager. My grandfather was the superintendent of Badlands and the chief ranger of Big Bend and Shenandoah. My father was the chief ranger of Yellowstone back in the 80s. So I kind of grew up with national parks in my blood, and started my career here in Yellowstone actually in 1990 after I got out of the military, working in some of the most remote backcountry areas of the park, which is really cool. If you haven't been to Yellowstone, especially into the backcountry, it's exceptional. Moved from there into a backcountry ranger job in Yosemite. Did a bunch of different jobs, ultimately became the chief of operations in Yosemite back in 2002. Went to DC and did a couple different jobs in our headquarters there. Was the superintendent of Natchez Trace Parkway, which is a 450-mile parkway that spans Nashville down to southern Mississippi, which was a great partnership park. Moved back to DC, went to Omaha and was the regional director for the Park Service Midwest region, which has about 61 parks in 13 states. And then in 2018 was reassigned actually to Yellowstone, which has been a fantastic 2.5 years. Look forward to talking to you about some of the challenges that we face, not only here, but across the national park system. We're excited about this new administration coming in and some of the priorities they're setting, especially in relationship to climate change and sustainability and some other things that, weren't necessarily the highest priority over the last 4 years. But we're looking forward to being engaged and setting some really high impact priorities moving forward. And this is a great park to do that in. So, I've got an undergraduate degree from St. Mary's College of California, and then I attended the MEM program from 2008 to 2010. So that's it in a couple minutes, Maggie. Thanks.
I take it you want me to go ahead. I'm Dale Threatt-Taylor. I can tell you, unlike Cam, 3 generations really, how about none? I come from no one in my family being an environmentalist, no one understanding anything about ecology, anything. I grew up in rural Union County, North Carolina, where I will tell you what I come from is parents who told me to get an education to get out. So that's where I come from. And it's funny that I grew up in a county and next to Anson County, North Carolina, where the father of soil conservation started. And I went to NC State undergrad and majored in conservation with a concentration in soil science. Found out that the father of conservation in Anson County started not only the Soil Conservation Service, where I started my career, and the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, where I spent 28 years of my career, and the Soil and Water Conservation Society, which I am now the chair of a national board of directors. And now, isn't that weird that I grew up in the county where all soil and water conservation started for the entire globe? The father, Dr. Hugh Hammond Bennett in Anson County, North Carolina. But isn't it weird, though, that I had no exposure to that? Which comes back to Duke University, because I guess the reason I am the executive director for the Nature Conservancy for the South Carolina chapter is because of leadership and Duke University. I would say that I'm not in this chair, and I call it the chair, had it not been for probably Duke University. I am the first Black state director for the largest environmental organization in the world. I broke 2020, but it happened. But to say that, the reason I guess I am here is because of my love for conservation, my love for ecology. I was in a class at NC State trying to figure out, as all young people do, what you're going to do with your life. Sit in a class, botany zoology class, which is really an ecology class, and everything fit. Everything made sense. And I've been a conservationist ever since, but to really hone my leadership skills, Duke did that. And if you want to be in the chair, having a degree from Duke was a bonus. I'll just add that to that. It's a grace and blessing. So that's my little short version. I hope that was short, but that was short for Dale. I'm just telling you.
That was great. Gotcha.
Well, my career in the environment really started on Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago on St. Patrick's Day probably about 20 years ago. So if anyone's been to Chicago, you've probably been to the Magnificent Mile. It's where the tourists go. It's big shopping, and it is full of annoying people like me at the time who get in your face and ask you to sign petitions for the environment or give money to a nonprofit. I came out of an activist tradition where I likely pestered my current employer via emails and phone calls to be more sustainable. But that day, St. Patrick's Day, about 20 years ago, if you've ever been to an Irish American town on St. Patrick's Day, you'll know that everyone is in a great mood and will sign anything you put in front of them. So I really got started with, and I got hooked on wanting to make a change. And then a few years, so I worked in nonprofit for a while, a series of small nonprofits around the Midwest. And then 2007 happened and Al Gore made his movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And all of a sudden, corporations wanted to know, what the heck is this sustainability thing? So I moved into a role with a global PR firm where I was a translator. I was an interpreter between environmental issues and corporations so that they could understand the science and they can create messages that made sense to their employees and to their stakeholders and to their investors. And I stayed in the corporate world because I got really excited about the opportunity to move an iceberg, eat an elephant, whatever, pick your analogy, whatever it is, you do it a little bit at a time, but you can have a big impact. And I would say the one thing I learned, and Duke being a great part of that journey to really crystallize what the business world needs and wants and can do, is that everyone wants to do the right thing. Whether you're a Fortune 50 corporation head of that, or whether you're walking the streets of Chicago with a petition in your hand, you want to do the right thing. My job is to help them do that by taking barriers out of their way and making it possible for themselves. So that's how I approach corporate sustainability and why I'm really excited about that career path.
Wow, what incredible career stories. Thank you all for sharing so much. It's great to hear the passion and history behind how you got where you are now. But I'd really like to dive right into some of the questions we've prepared now and hear some of your thoughts on organizational environmental footprint. And start by asking you to think about how organizations inevitably have an environmental footprint, whether that's through the process of managing brands or products or managing visitors and landscapes. And so with that in mind, how does your organization address or think about the footprint associated with some of its core activities? And why don't we start with Dale on this one and then move to Katya and Cam.
Oh, that was a pop quiz. I like following Cam. Really? How our organization, well, it's easy to start with the nonprofit because the Nature Conservancy, gosh, we get up, eat, sleep, drink, and smoke it, we have to walk our talk. We believe it. And our footprint, it's a constant, I guess, if you can imagine how if you can take an environmental organization where we've got everybody from photographers to accountants, and then all of the science folks put together, all of us conservationists put together in a room, and we have to balance budgets. We have to figure out how we're going to get from here to there. We've got to figure out how we're going to keep staff, how we're going to be able to talk to donors, and all while walking our talk. And I think the biggest thing is the fact that TNC has established these core goals, these core ethics that we have. So we have a certain set of values, and in these values, integrity is one of them. And I guess that's how we do it. We still have to fly some places sometimes. We have to drive to our preserves. And as much as we want to work on wildlife and aquatic life and clean air and climate and resiliency and everything we do, we know we have an impact. The thing is figuring out how we balance that and how we reduce it is actually core to our work, to the mission of the organization. I think that's the biggest thing. Integrity beyond reproach is one of our core values, and we have to challenge each other all the time. So in a nonprofit, it's not like we're scrambling for jobs from each other, things. We're all, we've bit the apple, as you can say. And so we're all trying to do better. So we pretty much challenge each other all the time. Now, mind you, understanding that the Nature Conservancy is an organization that's in 72 countries. It's the largest one. And so we fight like we're just hometown. I focus on South Carolina, and we constantly are talking about what are we doing to reduce our footprint. I think that's my answer is it's core. It's not one thing, but it's everything. It's us walking the talk. So it's not one specific thing. It's us living our values. So we can get into specifics, but that would take all day. But do understand it's just natural for us. That's my answer.
Absolutely. No, it's very important to have those core values at the heart of your organization. So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Katya, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. At a big consumer packaged goods company that makes a lot of different types of food products, we think about our footprint through two lenses. One is, what is the scale of the environmental impact? And then two is, what is the level of direct influence we have to correct it? If you haven't learned about it yet, you will probably have an opportunity to examine something called a materiality matrix, which a lot of our companies in my peer set and elsewhere publish annually in their citizenship reports. It is the result of a deep exercise whereby we interview internal stakeholders, leadership on down to functional people doing the work, and external stakeholders, shareholders, nonprofits like where Dale works, government agencies, and others, and ask them, what do you think our rightful role is when it comes to environmental impact? What are the impacts we have on you, and what are the impacts that are most in line with the direction of where this company is headed? And through that, we prioritize. A company can do a lot of good, but it can't do a lot of good if it's spread too thin. So really analyzing where are your biggest footprint areas and where do you have the biggest likelihood of success doing something about it is how we measure.
Absolutely. There are so many different ways that we could address our environmental footprint. And so it's really important to understand what is a priority to our stakeholders and to our company. And so it's great to hear your thoughts on that too. Tam.
Well, so it's interesting with the national parks because you've got a conflict between conservation, environment, economics, and different drivers and many divergent opinions about which one is more important, and especially when it comes to national parks. I mean, we've got 50 million more people in the national park system across America now than we did 5 years ago. That's a huge increase. The 200,000 metric tons of CO2 that are generated by visitors and employee operations within Yellowstone alone every year, something like 75% of that is coming from vehicles that visitors drive into the parks. And the Park Service and many federal agencies have been really good over the years at talking about what should be done. And the Park Service specifically, we've made taken some good steps in certain years, especially over the last decade. But we have a lag in our organization that sometimes prevents us from setting realistic goals that are achievable and then developing the right actions that we need to take to actually execute on what we say we're going to do. So we'll set, lofty goals, but then we've built 50 new structures in this park since 2003. We've got, 1 million more people per year coming into the park. We've got a lot of great ideas like, hey, let's do shuttle systems and get people out of their cars, reduce emissions that way, for instance. when you talk to the public, and especially in a park like this, 80% of the public thinks a shuttle system is a great idea, as long as they don't have to use it. And so when you look at this park generates somewhere between 500 and 700 million a year in visitor spending in local economies. So if you're a business owner in Jackson Hole or in West Yellowstone or any other gateway community, your livelihood is dependent upon more visitation. You want more. Us trying to figure out that balance, not only from a standpoint of protecting this park and its resources, but also understanding that our footprint grows the more that our operations expand, our facilities expand, the more visitors that come into the park, the more visitors that come into the system. And so do we have strategies that can adapt to some of those changing conditions, especially as U.S. national parks become more popular worldwide? And then are we ready to and willing to take some or make some difficult decisions that may restrict visitation in certain areas, may change the way visitors move, may change the way the park operates? I mean, there's certain things also that are very, very difficult to change. I mean, if you've been to Yellowstone in the winter, this park is bigger than Rhode Island and Delaware put together. There is a massive amount of snow. And you look at the diesel usage that we have every year, the number of vehicles that we use to get around, which is almost 1,000 just in the Park Service, snow plows, snowmobiles, garbage trucks, you name it. It becomes very difficult to develop really good alternatives that can reduce some of those emissions. We've got structures, we've got 850 historic structures. Some of those are well over 100 years old. They're not energy efficient. I think somewhere around 50% of our electricity comes from about 15 to 20 of our major buildings and structures. It costs a lot of money to retrofit 100 and 120-year-old historic structures and get them more energy efficient. So, I think we've got a pathway forward. Obviously, the last 4 years, we've done some really good things. We are really excited, as I said in my opening, to see the Biden administration put sustainability, climate change at the top in relationship to how that supports us funding-wise and otherwise, about priorities that get set at the most senior levels of the government and how those trickle down to support actions that we may want to take here on the ground in Yellowstone and across the country and the system.
Great, thank you all for that. It is so interesting and wild to hear just how varied the approaches have to be with your very different organizations. Also, you guys are rock stars and you've anticipated some of our questions. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different route with our next question and ask, what are, say, 1 or 2 concrete examples of steps that you're taking to address your organization's footprint? They can be big or small, but something you find material to addressing your footprint. And whoever has something to say, feel free to speak up.
I can maybe kick you guys off with that one. So Conagra brands, I'll give you a sense of what we make. We have over 100 different food brands, Hunt tomatoes in a can, to Healthy Choice frozen meals in a tray, to Bird's Eye frozen vegetables in a bag, to Snack Pack pudding in a cup, to Orville Redenbacher popcorn in a microwavable bag and box. So it gives you a sense of all the different types of ingredients and packaging materials that we have to manage. This is our biggest footprint. Ingredients we buy and the packaging we put out there for our food products. I'll say there are 2 big ways we're going after those. One is our 2025 sustainable packaging target. By the year 2025, we plan to have 100% of our packaging be renewable, so plant-based, recyclable, or compostable. Today, because we use a lot of fiber, so boxes or recyclable plastic resins, we are already at a packaging portfolio that is 84% renewable, recyclable, or compostable by weight. over the next 4 years, we're really getting at that challenge 16% to get all the way there. And the tough issues on packaging are really thin, flexible plastic films that you see everywhere. Those are the types of packages that we currently do not have robust recycling infrastructure for in the US. Although the technology is out there, it hasn't been brought to scale. And on the ingredient side, we have a 2030 science-based climate change target that has us reducing the carbon footprint of our product portfolio by 20% on average. That product carbon footprint is primarily driven by ingredients, specifically animal proteins. So we will be working with our suppliers to cut down the carbon footprint of our beef by innovate more plant-based meals. We also happen to own the Gardein brand, if anyone's a fan of plant-based meats and meals that mimic meat. So expanding those product offerings in the marketplace as a way to get at that lower carbon footprint portfolio.
So a couple ways that we're looking at. So I mentioned the Great American Outdoors Act. I think maybe some of you've followed that, and the Park Service has minimally a $12 billion deferred maintenance backlog for roads, bridges, structures. It's a great opportunity, because a lot of what I talked about with how we retrofit and whether we build, new structures, whether we retrofit old structures, takes money. And our ability to do things right takes money. And so, we've been fortunate to receive a substantial amount of funding that is going to allow us to make our structures much more energy efficient. An example, we have about 35,000 bulbs that need to be changed over to LED. We've got some very good corporate sponsorship. We're doing this in partnership with a lot of folks. And we've launched a massive retrofit initiative that we think will have a really big impact on our energy use, just from changing out light bulbs, which is, as you know, relatively simple. But when you got 36,000 of them to change, it takes a little time and money. We have 9 major wastewater and water treatment facilities in the park. These facilities were built sometimes 50s, 60s, 70s. They're aging. They use a massive amount of energy and electricity to process wastewater, to treat drinking water and that kind of thing for visitors. And we've got some very good projects queued up to rebuild, renovate, rehabilitate a lot of those wastewater treatment facilities and water treatment plants. That will be a major energy savings. We're a part of a pilot this summer that is going to try out a driverless electric vehicle shuttle. For those of you that have been in the park, the corridor between Old Faithful, Norris Canyon, West Yellowstone is one of the most congested in the park by far. We're looking at a shuttle feasibility study to see how feasible it is. Would people ride a shuttle, say, starting at Old Faithful into the Geyser Basin and back? This electric vehicle shuttle will be at Canyon, and for 50 days the shuttle will run from the lodges to the village, and from the camp, and then another 50 days from the campgrounds to the village. It's really not designed to move a lot of people this year, but rather, is this technology viable in U.S. national parks, especially in remote areas? And so, we're very excited about that. The National Park Service policies have evolved substantially over the years in a good way. But how we build, where we build, if we build, is a question that we're continuously asking ourselves. And we've got some real opportunities to, we've got a moratorium on kind of new structures in this park right now, which is a good thing. What we definitely don't want to do is have a net gain in structures. So if we lose an old structure and replace it, that's one thing. We're trying to do whatever we can not to add structures. We've got some phenomenal business partners in the park that run the hotels and the restaurants, and they have thousands of employees that need housing and lodging and dorms, and their energy efficiency, and then whether we put solar on on the Old Faithful Inn, or I'm not saying we're going to do that, but I mean, there's a lot of ideas that people have on how we can address our footprint more substantially. We have a huge snowmobile winter use activities that happen throughout the park. We've engaged a company in Canada that's making electric snowmobiles, and we think there's some viability there. We may test a few of those out next year, and that could be a really big thing, not only from an emission standpoint, but from noise for animals, bison, things like that. So there's just a couple things that we're looking at on that front.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Great to hear those additional details on how you're thinking creatively about your environmental footprint. I want to ask next, how does your organization's mission create the space for addressing your environmental footprint? And Dale, I know you touched on this a little bit in your introduction, so you can feel free to expand more if you want. Otherwise, I'll leave this for Katya and Cam to expand on. But thinking about how the mission of the National Park Service is to preserve cultural and natural resources, or the mission of maybe a Conagra is to create impactful food brands, not necessarily to directly reduce your environmental footprint, but how does your mission statement create the space for you to develop a strategy around addressing your organization's environmental footprint?
Well, I won't miss the opportunity to say what the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. Being a nonprofit and not having a product or not having property, well, we have properties, but you're right, it's a little bit of challenging. We have to stick to our core values, so I'm not sure how to answer that. I am humble enough to know when to hush and you know what, say, you know what, I'll let Cam go ahead and go.
You let Cam.
Yeah.
So if I got your question right, I think environmental sustainability is embedded in the Park Service mission. Talking about it, like I said earlier, is one thing. Practicing it is another. And we've got a phenomenal group of people in Washington and the regions and the parks that have a lot of expertise in this area, have worked hard over decades to try to get the Park Service onto a consistent platform. Like I said, our policies have evolved, they've gotten better. We have a long way to go in front of us. And, it gets back to some of these competing demands and, how willing are we to sacrifice a substantially increased footprint in order to accommodate the numbers of visitors coming to the U.S. National Park System, and at what point and how, in some consistent way, do you strategically address some of those challenges? And those are tough decisions because everybody's got an opinion, and everybody thinks, the mission of the service is around conservation, it's around preservation predominantly. However, there's a major enjoyment component to our mission as well. And so, that enjoyment part does drive a considerable footprint in our parks. And we've got to strike the balance of resource conservation, protection, continuing to strengthen our ecosystems across the country. At the same time, host hundreds of millions of people each year, and then conduct our operations in a way that is conducive for protecting the parks. At the same time, doing it in the way with whatever technology and tools are available that can, take advantage of sustainable technology. What I'd like to see us moving forward doing is more of a strategic approach that is not piecemeal. So we've got a lot of parks that have great ideas. We have great program managers that want to implement all kinds of things. We don't have a real consistent strategy at this point that I think transcends the various levels of government and the various levels of the Park Service. And that's something that's worthy for us to strive for moving forward.
So Cassidy, here's my challenge between the profit world and the government world. All of the, with the Nature Conservancy, our funding is based on, mostly donor and membership. But yet our mission never wavers. It is to conserve the land and waters on which all life depends. But yet, at what point can we balance our sheets? Because we can only get so many grants, and we can only have, we have to preserve the land. So at what point do we sacrifice, an energy efficiency? At what point can we decide not to get this vehicle over that vehicle because we only have so much money? And I guess that's my challenge. I'm trying to figure out how to verbalize that, because it's a big difference between the profit world and the government world. And Cam, I'm not saying you've got all the money in the world to fix all the problems. That's not what I'm saying, but you do have a funding stream. And of course, with for-profit and a company, you've got a, streaming source. It's just a different, I'm just sitting here contemplating.
The one thing I would say to that, Dell, is the, there's a massive influencer role that organizations like the Nature Conservancy play. And so, within your organization, it may be, there are obviously conversations and discussions about how do you reduce or address the footprint of the Nature Conservancy. I think more powerfully is your ability to shape and influence perspectives and drive actions that are in the corporate world or in the government world, and do that from a supporting way. I think you all do that very well.
We do a great job. In fact, here in South Carolina, I'm a member of an organization that we've created called Sustain SC, where it's commerce and conservation together. And it's one of the crucial things we're doing, where we have brought in the business world and we're impacting that while understanding that conservation cannot stand alone for the very reasons I just said. We're donor based, we're funded based that way. And yes, you're right. Our policies, our advocacy work, our government relations, and especially our work with the business community of being an influencer, yes. And I guess I was kind of hung up on thinking about internally our own nature preserves and our own office operations and things. And, for a director, it comes back to bottom line. So see, I'm back in school again. This is such a good learning experience for me, because I'm sitting here thinking, I forgot how much of an impact we do have on the business community and our agency partners. I'm sorry, Katya, you go right ahead.
No. You're teeing me up nicely, because you're teeing up stuff that I wanna react to. We planned it, guys. So Dale hit on something that I think is an important distinction about missions, organizational missions. The words very rarely change. Dale's org's mission has been the same for decades. Conagra is a 101-year-old company. We've been making consumer packaged goods for decades. We have always been for the purpose of making good food. But in the early 80s, good means tasty. In the early 90s, good meant low cholesterol, high fiber. Today, good means something else again. Good means do all those things plus lower environmental footprint. So the expectation and the interpretation of the mission changes. The words might not. Those are two separate things.
I love that. What a lovely, concise way to put it. I think we can jump right into the next question unless you have more to build on, but that was a lovely way to wrap that up. So we were also curious about how all of your organizations prioritize your strategies for environmental preservation and for mitigating your footprint. You know, how does the decision-making process go? How do you incorporate internal strategy or data? How do you involve outside groups, or do you keep it entirely internal? Once again, I'll turn it over to anyone who has an immediate answer.
Well, I'll go ahead and say with the Nature Conservancy, especially here in South Carolina, but the organization as a whole, if it doesn't fit in the priorities, we're going to pull each other's collar and say, hey, what are you doing? You know, are you on mission, off mission, or whatever? It has to tackle climate change. It has to protect land and water. It has to provide food and water sustainability. And it has to build healthy cities. If it doesn't fall into that, and land and water is oceans also. So I need to, you know, we're global. When I say global, I mean the entire planet. And so if we're all of a sudden building libraries, somebody's drunk the wrong Kool-Aid. We've got our own Kool-Aid, okay? You know what I'm saying? So it has to fit in that. Imagine that comes down to every single chapter, and I'm in the South Carolina chapter, that we still have our own strategic plan, and we go through, it has to fit. If it doesn't, imagine trying to run an organization where you do not have your priorities, and because our priorities still have to line up with funding, still has to line up with what's going on in South Carolina. Can y'all imagine how South Carolina is governed? And so TNC South Carolina is one of the best chapters of the Nature Conservancy. And how do we do that? And we cannot do that by not making sure that our priorities line up with how the citizens and the representatives of South Carolina are thinking and what the issues are. So if we completely ignore transportation, and transportation is not one of our priorities, we have to figure out that sweet spot. And so it's a constant. We have to figure out water and how agriculture impacts our priorities. We have to figure out our coastal communities with the flooding and resiliency. That is core to our mission. But we also have to figure out how people live and think and how they worship everything. So it's such a complex thing, but having our strategies and our priorities, be it on a chapter level or on a global scale, works for us. It's complex, and we have the scenario, we call it the fire hose, because it's just constantly at you, but it works for us. So that's how we do it.
You know, I'll say something that I think as environmentalists a lot of us know. Science is not always a common language. We've seen that in the climate change debates over the past decades, and the difference between policy and scientific understanding. And a very, very wise environmental communicator, Suzanne Sheldon of the Sheldon Group, once mentioned to me, you cannot fight emotion with facts. So when it comes to using information to set our corporate strategy, to help determine what our goals are, as much as we can, we work with science-based nonprofits. TNC, great example of that. We work with universities, but at the end of the day, we have to be cognizant that there are stakeholders within our value chain. There are consumers who buy our products who have different points of view. And we have to be cognizant of that and understand that going a purely science-based route with our sustainability strategy and not considering the role of policy, politics, consumer preference is just not a recipe for success.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so, you know, the Park Service about 10 years ago had a climate-friendly parks initiative. We still have it. I think it started off in a 10, 11 era, and really tried to do kind of what I was talking about earlier, which was get parks on a more consistent platform, help them understand what their footprint was, help them measure some of the key components that goes into that, whether that's in, you know, transportation or energy or, you know, other alternative energy, renewable energy, solutions that could be used. We got a really good start. Not everybody became a climate friendly park, but I think it's one of those things where each park is so different. You got parks in urban areas, you've got parks that are in Alaska, you got parks that are in Guam, you got parks that are, remote and isolated like Yellowstone or Glacier or things like that. Do the people in the parks that are managing a lot of what we're talking about understand what the footprint means? Do they understand what their individual and collective contributions are to that footprint? Do they understand what actions they can take at a micro or macro level to reduce that footprint? And so, for us, as far as the question about prioritizing, we're looking at, do we have the right data sets about emissions, about whether, what areas are controllable versus which are not so controllable. I mentioned a couple examples of the wastewater treatment facilities generating massive amounts of, or using massive amounts of electricity. A lot of our structures being less than sustainable and energy friendly. So what we've done, we drive 3 million miles a year, just the Park Service government operation in Yellowstone alone. Imagine that across 421 units across the country and all of our territories. Are there ways that we can drive less? Are there different types of vehicles? But generally speaking, as far as the prioritization, which areas are having the biggest impact on the footprint, and do we also have the best control or the most control to reduce? And then in the next category is kind of like the areas that are, like visitation continuing to go up and up. We may be able to control that someday. We are not controlling that necessarily right now, at least in most places. And so, really being able to define what that problem is, and then what actions do we want to take and develop to address them? Which areas do we have direct influence on versus, we might be able to influence? And then a lot of those workshops that I talked about, those are not just Park Service workshops. I mean, they're done in partnership with local communities, with universities, with scientists. There's a lot of great expertise out there, and we do a good job in a lot of areas taking advantage of that. But I have a feeling, and I'm optimistic that we're going to even do better here moving forward.
Absolutely. Thanks again for sharing. I think a common theme that I picked out as all of you were speaking was the importance of reaching a common understanding and making sure that we are speaking the same language as we work to develop these strategies and prioritize how we're going to address our environmental footprint. Before I ask my last question, I just want to remind anyone in the audience, if you have a question you'd like to ask the panel, feel free to write it in the chat, either to everyone or to Laura Collins as we prepare for our audience Q&A section. But the last question I wanted to ask was just curious if there is anything interesting you've learned as you've gone through this journey to address your organization's environmental footprint. Any surprising discoveries about your environmental footprint that you didn't know maybe this thing was even related to your footprint until you started diving into this, or any lessons on how you address a footprint within an organization that you'd like to share?
Before I get to that question, I think I want to just come back to the Great American Outdoors Act, which is giving the Park Service $5 billion or $6 billion to spend on deferred maintenance reduction. We have built into the criteria for approval of a lot of those projects, climate resilience criteria, really something that we haven't done that well before. And basically what that means is, as we move into project formulation, for the first time in a really organized way, we're looking at a lot of factors relating to climate change and relating to, resiliency, reducing our footprint as we move forward. And so we're not just reducing deferred maintenance and still having that same footprint, but we're also reducing deferred maintenance and addressing and taking into consideration a lot of those factors that are very important on this topic. as far as surprises go for me, you know, I'm surprised at least in this park, we have not done the greatest job over the years of tracking. We do a good job of saying this is how many tons of CO2 we're emitting, or how many diesel gallons, or how much electricity we use in kilowatt hours, or whatever the case is. But it just becomes a report, and it's like, here's where we are. I'm a little surprised that we don't have more definitive, realistic goals. We took a snapshot in this, well, across the country. We used 2003, for instance, as a kind of a baseline year. And for a variety of reasons, that was a really low year for us. There was like almost no snow, so we didn't plow the 350 miles of roads as much as we normally do. So our diesel usage was down unbelievably that year, but that was the baseline year. And then every year since then, for instance, in that category, we've been like 50 to 70% over that baseline. And this comes back to, you know, are we setting realistic goals? And so if you have a goal or a baseline that you're using, and you know, you're 50 to 70% over that every single year for 20 years almost, either it's not a realistic goal, or the baseline year, for whatever reason, maybe wasn't set properly. And so, you know, I think there's a lot that we need to do around setting realistic goals that people don't feel like are so much of an uphill battle they'll never achieve them. And that's really one of the best ways we're going to get, as a team, everybody to independently and collectively contribute to goals that get set through their own actions and through the actions of the organization, is to understand what that is, and to have goals that are achievable and people can actually see progress. And so, you know, it's maybe a little bit of a surprise to me that we've got goals that in my mind are probably unattainable. And how do we reset those into in a way that makes sense and that people understand and can contribute to, so we can succeed?
I think my biggest surprise was finding out that I could stop feeling guilty about being a bad locavore. The transportation part of the carbon footprint of food is tiny compared to the positive impact that sustainable ag practices can make, especially for a food company and global supply chains that are just really intricate. The relatively small slice of the pie that food transport was a surprise.
I think my biggest surprise has been the lack of fighting. I came to the Nature Conservancy and expected that we would all be challenging each other a little bit. I come from a government world, local government, federal government, state government. I've been all of them. And we challenged each other quite a bit because we all had such different views of what we should do sustainably. And it got loud. And so I expected that when I came to the Nature Conservancy, that there will be a lot of loud challenges. And I was very surprised. And I think the reason there isn't is because we're so busy implementing our work and you know, and trying to do our priorities and stay and live our values, that a lot of the fighting maybe has been done in the past, and maybe it's old to them. I'm new to the organization, so do understand, I'm coming from that perspective. Maybe they've had the fights out, but it turns out they really are we are trying to walk the talk. And it's a different personality. And me, I'm still questioning everything. And I think I'm in the minority of questioning a lot of things. I think that honestly, a lot of folks in the Nature Conservancy are still very much smarter than I am, very quieter than I am, very more very scientific. And so they've already decided that they are going to be very sustainable. I mean, they camp, they eat, they fish, they walk the talk, and I don't do all that. So maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm the one that needs to examine self, Dale, and realize that, okay, you don't have to drive that gas guzzling old car you've been doing. Maybe you need to look at your team and realize how they're doing it. So I'm surprised at the lack of fighting because the more I look around, I'm pleasantly surprised at how just natural it is for the team to walk the talk. Not perfect. But we do question things and walk it. So I'm pleasantly surprised. So gonna keep challenging myself. Gonna just be honest about that and say I'm not the best environmentalist there is. And keep challenging myself.
Absolutely. Those are some great insights. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And I think we'll turn it over to Laura Collins from here to share a few audience questions.
Thanks, Cassidy. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to kind of combine two questions. So as Cece pointed out, organizations are made up of individuals, and convincing people to act urgently on climate change can be very challenging. And I think it would be especially challenging if you are in a role within an organization that doesn't directly deal with reducing your organization's footprint. So my question for you all is, what advice would you give to someone who isn't in a decision-making position in their organization directly related to reducing their environmental footprint? What advice would you give them on how to implement change? And I'll let Cam, you start us off.
Well, what I would say is if we have good quality leadership in the organizations, they're constantly, number one, hiring the best of the best, and number two, they're listening to them. And I think if the organization has clear priorities and the right people in the right places, then it usually can facilitate open dialogue, good conversations. And, you know, I can't tell you how many people have influenced my decision making that are not necessarily, I mean, everybody's in a leadership position in my mind. They may not be in the key management role per se yet. But I would suggest that if you're in the right organization, you've got leaders that are allowing you to lead and listening to what you have to say, and are using what your knowledge, your expertise to help shape decisions, informed decisions, and things like that. I would suggest if you're not feeling that way, that that's another problem. But don't underestimate your ability to get to people in the right positions and help them understand what solutions maybe aren't being executed, or I regularly get education from the phenomenal team here and across the service about things that I wasn't even thinking about that get incorporated into decision making. So I would never hope that someone that's got valuable opinions doesn't get listened to. I think there's a difference. Sometimes everyone's got ideas, and a lot of times those are really good ideas, but also understanding that in the bigger picture, sometimes not all ideas can be implemented all at once. But I've had a lot of people that work with me who have just taken self-initiative and said, there's a problem. I can either choose to complain about it, or I can do something with it, and have really inspired a lot of other people to make very good decisions that benefit the organization.
I
Great,
think
thanks,
the
Sam. Go
first
ahead.
thing you have to do is stop thinking you're not in a decision-making position. Conagra has 15,000 employees. The number of people that have the word sustainability in their title, 4. I have a team of 4 people who are called sustainability specialists. I probably work with 50 people who influence sustainability. It comes from all walks of the organization and all levels. The best way to become a part of the sustainability team is to take whatever job you have and make a sustainable change to it, and then market that change to your team and throughout the organization.
I guess, and I had influencer down, so I'm glad you said that. I am in a leadership role, and I tell my team here in South Carolina, I know I tell them at least once a week, don't forget, I work for you. I have a servant leadership mantra that has always been my thing, that I work for my team. I work for them. And my goal is to empower them because no one wants to feel like they're part of a team if they aren't heard. All the things, that's been said already, they need to feel like they're heard. And I, as a leader, I don't think I could be a good leader if I didn't have a servant leader mentality of empowering my team to say, hey, no matter what, let's hear what you're thinking. Let's see, because some of the best ideas come from every other brain other than this one. I know how to move the stuff. I know how to get her done, but I don't come up with it, or I'm not, it's our other folks, it's the team as a whole, and everybody has a role. So if Nicole or Cece or Zach or Laura or Megan has an idea and nobody hears it, imagine how we're going to miss out. Imagine that. Y'all, I'm a little older generation. I know Joe is in my class, so Joe gets this. He probably is like me of understanding that when we were kids, we were told we were going to have flying cars by now, and they were going to be hopefully energy neutral. I mean, really flying cars by the Jetsons. And I always think about that and use that to motivate myself to say somewhere, somebody did not empower or did not provide an education for, or did not, or withheld, more than likely withheld the education from somebody who was going to create that flying car that we all should have had by now. And I live by that, thinking every single day, how can I keep empowering, Jill and Christine? How can I do that to make sure, and Joe too, and Dale, we're not left out of, we're not done yet. But how can I empower the young folks to make sure that whatever they're thinking can at least be heard, filtered through, figured out, and released or set in motion. So that to me, I don't know, but that's my response.
That's fantastic advice, all 3 of you. Thank you. I think I can speak for everyone in the audience, and I feel very inspired. So I have a question, and it's directed towards Katya, but I think we can expand upon it for Cam and Dale. So the question is, what is Conagra doing to support their suppliers / farmers in integrating sustainable agricultural practices? And I would say for Cam and Dale, what are your organizations doing to support the communities you work with or around, or your external forces to help you in reducing your organization's environmental footprint? So Katya, I'll let you start.
Sure, I can kick it off. We just within the last 6 months joined a great organization as a major partner called the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action. It's one of the largest farmer and rancher consortiums in U.S. Ag. One of the most important things I've learned through interactions with farmers in our network are farmers already want to be sustainable. They work a set plot of land that they are tied to for multiple generations. We have more to learn from them than we have to teach or to put upon them. So first thing to do is really shift your mindset to understand and appreciate what they're already doing. And then secondly, you have to promote and reward the steps that they take. We are a co-developer of a new vision of called Decade of U.S. Ag, in partnership with other companies and farmers and ranchers and even government partners to reimagine U.S. agriculture as climate neutral, climate negative, and regenerative. The first step, I think, to really working with farmers is bringing them on board, understanding we have a common goal, and taking the time to listen and learn and hear from them on where they want to go.
Thanks, Katya. Looks like maybe, I don't know, did Dale hop? Oh no, Dale's there.
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, you're there. I see you.
I would hear it from Deb if I left early, said I gotta go. No, we're not having that conversation. Deb was my advisor when I was at Duke, and so no, she's still my boss. Yeah, no.
Yeah, no, I relate to that. So what is what is the Nature Conservancy doing to support the communities that you work with, or influence the people around you to help reduce the Nature Conservancy's environmental footprint?
Well, do understand first the nature of the Nature Conservancy is the first that even though we're in 72 countries and we're in North America and all over, I am South Carolina. We do have this wonderful structure set up that I get to focus on South Carolina. I don't have to do it the way they do it in Wyoming, where you are. I get to do it different. And so I get to, address the issues of South Carolina. But that being said, all of you have seen Hamilton, you need to be in the room where it happens, okay? If you're not present, if I'm not willing to go out and meet with the community, it helps that I am a Southerner and I can relate, but you gotta be able to be in the room where it happens, which means I need to go to the meetings. I need to figure out what's going on. You can't come in, and that's the thing about environmentalists, and especially those of us in the Nature Conservancies and others, you don't go in and tell people what they're gonna do in their neighborhood. Do not do that. As any environmentalist anywhere, I worked with farmers all those years. I dare not go to their farm and tell them what they better do in conservation. Now, do I need to sell conservation and help them? I used to tell our staff, I used to tell my team, you go in and you fall in love with their land the way they love their land, just like you said for generations. Same here with the Nature Conservancy. We need to go in and fall in love with the community and understand why this is home. Don't go tell somebody to move their home out of a flood zone. Their grave sites are there. The trees that they used to swing on is there. We need to figure out how to be in the room and communicate and then come up with those nature-based solutions, come up with things. So to me, don't ever get high and mighty environmentalists. Don't ever, just because you got that Duke degree don't mean jack. You need to be part of the community. You need to love the community. You need to understand where they're coming from, because their children and their jobs and their church, and that's important. So to me, that's how it matters. If you're gonna make a difference in reducing somebody's footprint, first of all, you gotta know, you gotta know what their footprint is. You gotta know why the footprint is there, and you gotta love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Cam, I see you're back. Do you have any thoughts on what the National Park Service in Yellowstone specifically is doing to support the communities around Yellowstone and the small businesses that rely on the income from the park to join you in reducing the environmental impact that, you know, the park produces and that folks have on visiting the park?
Well, I think so. We have a lot of cooperators in these gateway communities that are very environmentally sensitive, and you know, a lot of them operate in the park. A lot of them have, you know, guiding businesses, whether it's snowmobiles or fishing guides or, you know, wildlife, those types of things. And so a lot of the things that we do and require in the park for them to operate, you know, kind of develops an ethic within a lot of those operators. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. There's obviously, you know, depending on where you are in the country, the reality is some people are more serious about it than others. I think if you look at what happened here in Yellowstone with the winter use rule, where we, you know, substantially reduced the number of snowmobiles coming into the park, both from a emission standpoint and noise standpoint. I mean, that was a 20-year conversation where there was a lot of divergent opinions about, you know, how many snowmobiles should be in the park, how many is too many. It went really to people's bottom lines and their businesses and things like that. Over time, there was a much better receptiveness to adjusting to a new model. And so I think that's another lesson there, is that even though there may be people or businesses or communities that aren't necessarily where you may want them to be, it's always worth continuing to work with them, talk to them, even if those opinions are different, and figure out where there's common ground and where you can build from. And we've done that largely, but like I said, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in many areas.
Thank you. All three of you, really, this has been so incredible. Your advice is excellent, especially where you all touched on about, you know, really working with and learning from, you know, the people, the communities, the companies, the farmers, the landowners who you interact with. So thank you so much for your time. I want to be cognizant of our time. So I'm going to pass it.
Didn't you have a bunch of tourism questions or something like that from Jackson Hole?
Oh, yes, I do, but we'll
Send those
connect
to me
offline. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that. So I'm going to pass it back to Deb, and she was going to close us out. But I just want to thank you for your wisdom and all of your thoughts. It's been wonderful.
Nice job, Laura.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Cam and Dale and Katya. It's really great to have you with these really different perspectives, but actually a lot in common. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate everyone that came out tonight to be part of this community. It's hard to find community right now, and this is what we're trying to do here. I also really want to thank Maggie and Cassidy for doing such a great job with the questions. That was really insightful questions. Thank you so much. And Laura, as always, for helping out with leading the change. And finally, last but not least, Anne and Caitlin, who are behind the scenes doing work for us. So thank you, everyone. I would venture to say that if you have any ideas on other topics you'd like to talk about, we love to put these things together to get everyone together in community. So, you know, you can always find me. You can send me an email and we can chat about it. So have a wonderful evening, and hope to see all of you in person sometime soon.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.